Hello the internet and welcome back to my channel. This is episode 2 of the Museum Tales series. As I mentioned in episode 1, these would like to be shorter forms videos when I'm doing some volunteering work at the Museum of Computing of Swindon. As I explained in my previous video, this might not be full videos involving a repair or a restoration, but I just want to show you what I'm doing when I'm doing my volunteering work here at the museum. And today on the bench I have an Apple II Europlus, which I believe is like the European version of the Apple II Plus, if not mistaken. And the Apple II Plus is like the Apple II with different ROMs, so they should be more or less the same machines. Now, this computer is not working, so let me show you what happens on this computer, and I'll tell you what I've done so far, and then we'll move on and I'll show you what I have in mind for today's episode. So right now I have the Apple controller card on slot 6, and I do have an Apple floppy drive connected to it. Now I do not know whether the floppy drive works or whether even the controller works, but I'm assuming hopefully it's doing something. The thing is, with the controller plugged in, it should try and boot from the disk, assuming the ROM is an Autostart ROM, and I haven't checked that yet. But I'm assuming to see something. Instead, I see this. And apologies for my capture device, which is not the best one and is jumping a bit, so ignore that one. So it's not doing anything, the floppy drive is not doing anything, and if I hit reset on the keyboard, it jumps to monitor, and I understand it should jump to basic or something, not onto monitor. Now, if I remove the controller card and I turn on the computer, again, I understand I should end up on a prompt, and then from there I can do whatever I want. I should have access to basic, but if I power on, it double bips and it jumps to monitor straight away. So my knowledge with the Apple II is a bit limited because I'm an Apple IIe person, and the Apple IIe has a different behavior, but I've been watching some videos, I've been educated myself on how this thing is supposed to work. It's not supposed to do that. So what I did last time off camera, I went ahead and reseated everything. I put some contact cleaner in all the memory RAMs and everything, all the ROMs, but that didn't change anything. And I was recommended to make sure that the ROMs have not become corrupted for whatever reason. The thing is, I didn't have a way to read them because these are equivalent to the 2716, if I remember right. At least on my previous programmer, which was the TL8662 Plus, they couldn't be read straight away. But the main thing I'd like to do in this video is to test my ROM replacement PCB, which is fitting a 27C256, which can be burnt with the programmer, and replaces the whole set of ROMs in here. So I remove all the ROMs, I fit my ROM replacement, I burn a proper ROM for the Apple, and that should give me a working Apple, assuming the issue is with the ROMs. Now, coincidentally, Adrian's of Adrian's Digital Basement has recently repaired an Apple II machine. It was a clone machine. If you haven't watched those videos, I would definitely recommend you go and watch them because they're absolutely amazing. There are lots and lots of weird faults, and it's really amazing. And Adrian managed to have a ROM developed, which is a diagnostic ROM. It's doing a pretty comprehensive job in terms of checking the memory. So thank you, Adrian, for coming up with that ROM, which I have compiled, and I'd like to burn a ROM with that diagnostic ROM from Adrian's Digital Basement and test the RAM of this computer, because hopefully that's the problem we are having. Now, as you might be noticing, there is one missing RAM chip in here. I believe this is because this machine at some point had, I think it was a language card. The thing is, I tested this machine without this row of RAM, which is not necessary to run the machine itself, and that still didn't work. Now, to test the ROM replacement card, I have these 27C512 ROM ICs. I don't have the 256, so what I have to do, probably I'll have to copy the first 256 to the rest of the ROM to just fill it up with something. I have erased the modules using these ultraviolet machine. If you have one of these, I would definitely recommend you open it up and take a look, because it's a horrible contraption. It can be very dangerous from my point of view, so don't leave it unattended. But I have erased the ICs already. We're going to program them, and then we're going to test them in the machine and see if it makes any difference. So let's power up in 3, 2, 1, go. Yes, it works. Yes, it's testing the RAM. Perfect. Okay, well, let's wait until the end. Again, apologies for the bad quality of my capture device. This is my cheapo capture device. I thought it would work. It's not, so next time I'll bring another one. But it is working, so the flickering, the colors, that's my capture device, but it's doing the tests. So let's see what it does. I'm definitely expecting this test to fail because there is a missing IC. So maybe what I can do, I can replace that IC because otherwise we'll come up with an error message and we can start again from the beginning. Let's do that. Right, so I got all the RAM sockets populated. Let's run the diagnostic and let it finish and see what works and what doesn't. Well, okay, well, the ROM is beeping, which, if I understand correctly, means it passed, but it was also supposed to display a table on screen, and I tested on my Apple IIe, and that's exactly what it was doing, and instead it shows a video full of, like, @ symbols. So I'm wondering what's happening here, whether there's something wrong with the display system and somehow the system is unable to display text properly. But from my limited understanding of this system and this diagnostic ROM, it looks like the RAM is working, the basic of the system obviously is working because the diagnostic is able to talk to the RAM and run the diagnostic, but there's still something wrong with it. It's still not working as I would expect. I am pretty impressed by these ROM replacement PCB, and the quality of the PCB is also pretty good, as usually is with PCBWay, who are also sponsoring this video, as you can imagine. If you would like a PCB manufactured for one of your projects, then take a look at PCBWay.com. The process is very easy. You will just need the Gerber files for the PCB, which you can upload on the website. The system is automatic, but you can tweak lots of parameters. The turnaround can also be tweaked depending on your needs. PCBWay also offers 3D printing, metal sheet fabrication, and much more. As a tinkerer, I'm always happy with the PCB manufacturing quality. It's pretty impressive, I shall say. The link to the website is down below in the description. Thank you PCBWay for helping this channel. And now let's go back to the Apple II. The next thing I'd like to try is to burn a ROM, which is basically a replacement of the existing ROMs. This is something I prepared off camera, and it basically had two different banks. One is the AppleSoft, the other one is the integer ROMs with Watson and Inspector, if I'm not mistaken. And I can change between the two banks using this little jumper here. So let's plug this up. In theory, if this works, it should give me a working Apple II exactly as you would expect as an Apple II, without any extra diagnostic or anything. It's just the replacement of the whole ROMs. Let's power up in 3, 2, 1, go. It's not even beeping. The only thing I can try is the other bank, but you know, it should have done something on that one. Power on now. Oh, I got a beep, which is good. Oh wait, we have a cursor. I've never seen a cursor on this monitor. Keyboard is working. Okay. This seems to be working. Oh, look at that. Okay, so it sounds like we might have a simple ROM issue here. And maybe I just made a mistake with the ROM on the other bank. I'm not sure about that. Again, apologies, I'm not extremely familiar with that, but when it comes to concatenate things together, it's easy to make a mistake. But this seems to be working. So my next step would be to plug the floppy drive again and see if that works with this ROM. Okay, well, floppy is connected. Let's power up and see if it does anything. It doesn't. But at least it doesn't go into monitor. Chances are the floppy drive is not working. So, you know, that could totally be a possibility. It's working! It's working! It's spinning! Why didn't it spin it by itself? That was an auto-run ROM, so it should have done it by itself. Let's try and load something. I've got my favorite diagnostic, which is XPS, so let's try and load from that one. Let's try again. So, we got something. Don't ask me why I have to open the drawer, and then it kind of works, but not much. But it's doing something. This is great. But again, chances are this drive might need some alignment, might need a head clean. And then it doesn't load the rest of the modules. So I would say let's give a clean to the heads and we'll move from there. Okay, well, let's see if it made any difference whatsoever. Power on now. It's a bit better. Oh, it loaded fully. Again, apologies for the jumping, that's my capture device. Let's see if it actually loads the rest of the modules. It does. Right, I'm wondering whether this is a diagnostic for the Apple IIe. I'm wondering whether this is looking for a different configuration of RAM. But the good news is, the system seems to be working. Right, the thing is, the system seems to be working, which is great. So I'm assuming that the issue with this Apple II is just one of the ROMs is not working. And that's why I was landing on monitor when I was booting up. Now, the other thing is I don't see colors, but that being said, this capture device is so bad, I can't really say that there's no colors. The best way to test this would be on a CRT monitor, but we can definitely run some more tests, hopefully with a better capture device. We can check with the oscilloscope whether we have the color burst, and I'm pretty confident that this board is supposed to output color because there is a color trim output here, so I guess there must be some color coming out of this board. Right, it's the following day. I've got my better capture device, is the OSSC, and I thought that rather than keep trying with the floppy drive, we can try with my floppy emu. Simply because that is going to remove the drive from the equation, simply because I don't know whether the drive is working. So let's make sure first that the motherboard is working, the RAM is working, everything is working. When I'm happy with the motherboard and the system, the bare system, we can move to the floppy and do that as well. So let's see if I can run some diagnostic from the floppy emu this time. So as you can see, the OSSC also has issues displaying the output of this Apple. At least it's not jumping around, but there is something. It looks like it's interpreting as color, but is not supposed to be color at this time because it should be black and white. But we can take a look at that in a moment. For the time being, I'm using this software, which is for the Europlus, so that should work with this machine. And I'm gonna run the RAM test, 48K RAM test, which is key number 4. And this looks like Adrian Digital's basement test, so I'm not sure if it's based on the same March test, I think it's called, U-March, something like that. But let's wait until it finishes and let's see whether there's any memory issues with the system. Well, the test passed, which is great. It's taken a while, so hopefully it was a pretty comprehensive test. Now, let's see if I can find another diagnostic and just to confirm that the memory is working fine. I've got Computer Inspector here. As you can see, somehow the picture here is much better. And also I'm noticing that no colors. So I'm not sure whether that's another fault or something that we need to look into. But again, we'll take a look at that in a minute. And this one has a memory test, number 5. Oh well, that was a pretty quick memory test. To me, that means it's only make sure that the memory was there. So I wouldn't call it a test, to be honest. Let me run the XPS diagnostic. It's for the IIe, but it has a nice test pattern with all the colors. And let's see whether that is showing any color at all. And no, we don't have color. It's a pretty nice picture, by the way. I don't know why it looks like After a while, the picture gets better. It doesn't show the fringing, the red fringing anymore. I know that the OSSC works with my Apple IIe, so I would expect to work with the Apple II Plus as well. But at least the picture is nice, it's not fringing anymore, but we definitely don't have color. Now, here on the motherboard, we have two adjustments. One which is unmarked, but it could be the video level, and one it says color trim. So I would say if I turn on the oscilloscope, we can scope the signal and see what happens when we change this to. The PAL signal is supposed to be 0.7 volts peak to peak, so we can adjust this control here. And when it comes to the color, it should adjust something on the color burst at the beginning of each line of the PAL signal. So let's turn on the oscilloscope and see what we can see from there. Right, okay, we got the oscilloscope running. This is not my oscilloscope, of course, it's the museum's oscilloscope. It's a Tektronix TDS510A. It doesn't come with a web interface, of course, but it's a great oscilloscope. It's one of those with the CRT, but everything is driven digitally, so it's absolutely amazing. Now, what you're seeing on the screen here is basically that the peak white, which is the white column on the test pattern, is currently measuring 1 volt. Is the delta here, and it says 1 volt. It's supposed to be 0.7, so I need to adjust something, and I think is this little trimmer here, this gray one. Let's turn it and see what happens. Yes, as you can see, it changes the amplitude of my signal. So I need to change it so it reads 0.7. Let me fiddle with it a bit. Oh, there it is. I mean, this is 0.72, I think is well within specs, and it should be fine. So we fixed that, and as you can see from the oscilloscope itself, we also have a color burst. So the color burst is there, but somehow my capture device is not capturing it, and it doesn't display the color. Now let's see what happens when we change the color trim. So let me zoom in on the color burst a bit. So that's a very, very clear color burst picture. I don't think my oscilloscope can do that, to be honest. The oscilloscope is telling me it's 3.6, 3.7 megahertz, and I'm measuring 280 nanoseconds. 280 nanoseconds is 3.57 megahertz. Now, with PAL, I think it's supposed to be 4.3 megahertz, and that's probably why my capture device is not getting the colors. And let's see what happens when I touch the color trim here. Right, so it looks like this is not affecting the frequency, but it's affecting the amplitude. So I'm turning the control now. As you can see, this is changing and also getting like not straight. So I think this needs to be adjusted like here, where you have the maximum amplitude and also the flattest signal amplitude response, let's call it that way. Now, obviously this is not fixing our color problem, but at least now we have the right peak-to-peak signal amplitude and we have the right color burst setup using the color trim. Right, so I had a look online and it turns out that 3.5 megahertz is the NTSC color burst frequency, and it turns out the Apple II Plus or Apple II Europlus is not a PAL machine. I had no idea. That's because it said Europlus. It was supposed to be PAL, but it's not. The Europlus was basically delivered with the same NTNC circuitry from the US, just the power supply was different. Maybe the refresh rate or the video output, I'm not sure about that. But the thing is, this is supposed to be a black and white machine, at least here in Europe. And to have PAL output, you needed an extra expansion card, which I don't have at the moment. So there's nothing wrong with the system. It looks actually pretty good, and it's black and white as it's supposed to be black and white. So apparently the only fault with this computer is the ROM. Two things to do before we close this video. I need to make a better ROM that works with the Autostart. Number two, if I can, I'd like to check these ROMs and see which one is not working. So, I can put an X on it and say, right, we're not going to use it, because obviously I'm assuming one is faulty, not all of them. But first, let me try and tinker with this ROM and see if I can make a fully working one which auto starts when I turn on the Apple II. Well, don't tell anybody, but I'm not at the museum anymore, as you can see. But I needed some wires to build this contraption, so I'm home doing this final test. what I got here are the 6 ROMs from the Apple II Europlus, and I'd like to find out which one is working and which one is not. Now, these ICs are 2316, and the closest IC that these programmers, whether it's the TL8662 Plus or my new T48, can read is the 2716. Now, in order to adapt the 2316 to what the programmer is expecting, I need an inverter and I need a little bit of rewiring, which I've done on this breadboard. So what happens here, the moment I'm plugging the 2316 onto the breadboard, the programmer will treat it as a 2716 and you should be able to read it. Now, the images of these ROMs are available on the internet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to load the image of each one of these ROM one at a time. And then I'm going to ask the programmer software to compare what I've loaded from my hard drive with what is on this ROM. And if it matches, it means the ROM is fine. And if it doesn't match, obviously it means the ROM is faulty. So let's go ahead and do that. First ROM is going to be the first one, which is 3410011. Here I'm loading the corresponding ROM image 3410011. So now I'm going to ask the programmer to just do a verification. I'm clicking on verify, click on verify here. That's it, it says verify finished, which means this ROM is totally fine. So I'm going to put a check mark on it and we can move on with the next one and see if one of these is not working. I'm totally expecting at least one not to work, otherwise I don't know what's happening with that Apple. But let's keep doing this until hopefully we find one which is not working. And there it is, this is 0013 and it says there are some differences. And actually it looks like it is completely different, just a few bits are correct, but as you can see, everything is basically red, which means it's not matching the ROM itself. Let's try and read this ROM and see what's inside it. As you can see, there is not much inside. I mean, you got these weird characters here. They look more or less all the same, and that's it. But if I'm opening the ROM I downloaded from the internet, it's completely different. So this ROM is busted. Now let's continue with the others and let's find out whether there are more faulty ones. There we go, it looks like we have one casualty, which is the 3410013. So that is gone. The others, I guess, can be reused for other systems as spares. That's it from home. Now let's go back to the museum. Okay, it's another day, you might see from a different shirt, and I've been looking into this ROM problem and I think I found what I was doing wrong. The ROM replacement calls for a 27C256. I didn't have them in my stash, so I went with 27C512, and I thought naively that it was going to be exactly the same thing. I didn't check the pin out, I thought, I'll give it a go and it should work. When it didn't work, I didn't think of, well, maybe there's a difference in pin out. And there is, as you might expect, the 512 version has an extra address line, as is twice as much the capacity of the 256. Now, the extra address line is pin 1, where on the 256 version, pin 1 is the programming voltage. So, first thing I want to do is let's check what happens on pin 1 on this little board when the computer is energized. I've got my Apple II turned on and let's see what we got on pin 1. We got 5 volts. So what happens is if I plug a 512 EEPROM on this card, the address line 15 is going to be high all the time. So what was happening, at least this is, I think is what was happening, is that I was recording information in a specific location of the ROM, which is how the manual says I should do that. But because then I have address line 15 constantly high, the computer is actually looking somewhere else. And that's probably why my ROM didn't work. So what I did, I went ahead, instead of modifying the 512 ROM, I just bought a 27C256, which is what I should have done in the first place. And the ROM I have right now is actually the 256, and hopefully it's gonna work this time. So let's see if this ROM now works. Let's power up and see what we get. Okay, well, I can still see that my floppy is not booting, is not trying to boot. I have the floppy emu connected at the moment and it's still not booting. But let me see what happens if I try and boot manually. So this is working as before. Now let's try and switch the bank. So I should go on the integer because this is the Applesoft, I can see that. And let's see what happens. So let's switch bank here by using this little jumper and power on again now. And I get this. Now, I've been looking into that and I think I might have seen this before and I thought, okay, there's something wrong with that. But I didn't know that the Apple II with the original integer basic, it actually starts like that. So all I have to do is press Control B and then return and I get into integer basic. Let's give it a go. It is working. So that was a combination of the wrong ROM and me not knowing how the Apple II works. But this is working. The Applesoft is working. What is not working is the auto start, and this is an auto start ROM, so it should boot up automatically when in Applesoft, but that doesn't happen. Now I've looked into this auto start problem and I've got a little bit of help from the Applefritter forum. It's an amazing place for this type of machines. Go and have a look, and thank you guys from the Applefritter forum for helping me out. The way the auto start ROM works is that every time the system is turned on, it will scan for a disk2 controller card in each one of the slots. So we'll start with slot 7, then 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I don't think it works on 0, but anyways, if it doesn't find anything, it will drop on basic. If it does find something, it will try and boot from the card. So the behavior I have right now is it's kind of stuck, but it's not in basic. However, if I switch the Apple off, I remove my controller, and I turn it back on, it drops me into basic. So it looks like it's been scanning all the slots, he didn't find anything, and it goes into basic and it works totally fine. Now, if I plug my controller back in and I turn it on, it gets stuck in here. However, if I stop the routine and I try and boot manually from slot 6, it's working totally fine. So something is wrong with something else. This doesn't look like it's a ROM problem. So the idea I've got is that the slot selection process is broken somehow. So in this case, I've got my controller in slot 6, and what if the computer is seeing the controller in slot 7 for whatever reason, and it tries to boot from slot 7, but there's no controller in slot 7, and it hangs on that screen without doing anything. So the first thing I want to do is to move the controller to slot 7, because if the process is broken somewhere, maybe it will work from slot 7. Let's give it a go. 3, 2, 1, go. And it works from slot 7. So this seems like the ROM is working, it's doing the auto start, but there is a problem with the selection of the slots. Now, there are many ways I can troubleshoot this. The thing I'd like to do is go back to my basic prompt and get into monitor. Now from here, what I can do, I can try and read the ROM of this card on different slots. My theory is that the card might appear on multiple slots because the slot selection is broken. So let's have a look. Let's read the ROM of this card in slot 7. So I'm definitely expecting to see the ROM of the controller. That's it. So that's what I'm expecting to see from the Apple II disk drive controller. That's the content, or at least the beginning of the content of the ROM of the controller. Now let's try and read the same area, memory area, on slot number 6. I should have an empty thing or something else because there's nothing connected to slot 6. And instead, as you can see, I've got exactly the same thing. So my theory, well, the theory I got from the Applefritter forum, to be honest, is that the controller is being seen on multiple slots. And when I don't have it on slot 7, the computer just hangs on slot 7 because he checks on slot 7 and he says, oh, the controller is there. I can boot from there, but the controller is not there. And so it hangs in there. You can see it also appears on slot 5. And also on slot 4. But you can see slot 3 has a complete different set of data in here. So for whatever reason, the controller is seeing in slot 7, 6, 5, and 4, but not in 3. And I did check, it doesn't show up in 2, 1, and 0 as well. So how do we fix this? Now, the IC responsible for selecting these slots is this little thing here. It's a 74LS138. And I understand it gets like a binary signal as an input, and then it selects outputs depending on the binary input. So the first thing I want to do is to scope these lines, the output lines, and see what happens, because in theory, what I'm expecting to see when the computer is powered on is to see one selection, one pulse for slot 7, one for 6, one for 5, one for 4, up to 0, and then it should stop. And if there is a card in between, it should stop in there, and then it should start a more active kind of signal, as it's going to be like selecting, deselecting, depending on what the processor is doing. Okay, I've got the controller in slot 5, and let's see what we see on the slot selection line of slot 7. Power up in 3, 2, 1, go. And as you can see, I got lots and lots of pulses, as if there was something in slot 7. What I'm expecting to see is one pulse for 7, one for 6, and then lots of chattering for slot 5, because there is where I got the controller. But it looks like the computer is trying to talk to something in slot 7. Let's see what happens for slot 6. And it's the same chattering. The computer is assuming that there is something in slot 6, but there isn't. What about slot 5? And it's the same thing. So yeah, I guess that's our problem. This is like the IC or something's happening around here, and all these slots, or some of them, are being selected at the same time. And that's probably why this is not working. So as a first test, I'd like to replace this little IC, because maybe there's something wrong with the input of the IC, but the output is definitely not right. So let's try that first. Okay, I've replaced the IC. Let's power up and see what happens in 3, 2, 1, go. As you can see, I only have like one pulse on this line, and now the line is quiet. Well, it's high, but it's not doing anything. So let's check for the next slot, which is slot 6, and it's also quiet. So let's check what we get on slot 5, which is where the controller is. Well, it is quiet, but the controller is, I guess, it might have booted up at some point. Let's connect my capture device and see if now this is working. Okay, let's power up in 3, 2, 1, go. And it's working! It's booting from slot 5. That is absolutely amazing. Right, so it looks like this is working, as the ROM is working as intended, and the Autostart also seems to be working. So that was the problem with the motherboard. I'm actually pretty surprised that just these two ICs, basically one ROM and one logic IC, and all the RAM is actually good. Now let's try and boot up from a different slot, like, I don't know, this is slot 2. See if that works in 3, 2, 1, go. It's loading, seems to be fine. Yeah, it's working totally fine. So that was our only problem with the Autostart. That is great. My final step for these Apple II Europlus is to test the floppy drive a bit better. It's been a bit unreliable over this repair video, and I'm not sure whether it's working fine or not. I brought one of my own disk drives, which works, but I cannot say whether it's perfectly aligned or not. For the time being, let's call the drives good and bad. Mine is supposed to be good, and the Europlus's is supposed to be the bad one. I started with some basic tests. I copied a disk from the good drive to the bad one, then tried putting the Apple using it with the bad drive. Then the other way around. The tests were a bit random, and it looked like it was due to my scarce selection of good quality floppy disks, to be fair. My collection of disks is pretty old and worn out, unfortunately. I even tried what I thought was a good disk printed at a factory, but the disk turned out to be bad, even with my good drive. I then borrowed some brand new floppies from the museum, and the music changed. The bad drive started working reliably, and I did not experience the intermittent issues I was seeing before. So no issues here, the drive is working fine. I checked the speed, it read a bit too fast, so I adjusted it to just below 300 RPMs as widely recommended. Finally, I cleaned and lubricated the head mechanism, including that plastic contraption that actually moves the head assembly. As a final test, I ran the XPS's drive test, which is a pretty nice endless test, which is testing everything on a drive. It passed all the time, so I was confident that the drive was working perfectly fine. Well, I guess this is it. The floppy is working perfectly fine. It's been running 32 passes and there's no errors whatsoever. The computer is running 5, the ROM is running as intended, and we replaced the faulty ROM with the ROM replacement, of course, and one logic IC which was preventing the slot selection to work as intended. Well, I guess this system is ready to go on display here at the museum. It just needs a good clean and I guess a monitor, which I still need to fix and or test. We have a few, but we don't know which works and which doesn't. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, as usual, I'd appreciate a thumb up down below, and also consider subscribing to this channel if you like this kind of things. For now, thank you for watching. I wish you a great day and hope to see you again soon here on this channel for my next videos. Thank you very much and goodbye. Bye.